I'm Rob Breakenridge for nationalpost.com and NP Comment. Our guest this week has been at the center of an ongoing debate around academic freedom and campus free speech. Dr. Frances Widdowson is a political science professor found to have been wrongfully terminated from Calgary's Mount Royal University. She is currently working on two documentaries, one on academic freedom and the other on the Kamloops residential schools case. Frances Widdowson, great to have you with us here.
Thanks for having me on.
Well, let's talk about the Mount Royal case, which was really ongoing for years. You were found to have been wrongfully terminated from Mount Royal, yet not yet reinstated. What's the latest on that, first of all?
So on February 6th, my case went before the Alberta Labor Relations Board. 6 hours of lawyers arguing for and against my reinstatement. I thought Mount Royal's case was, as usual, completely ridiculous. Just as one example, they think this should be held against me that I argue that Mount Royal should be made an academic institution once again. So my fighting for Mount Royal to be an academic institution is seen by Mount Royal to be a problem. And there was a lot of things that were said like this. So I think people will agree when they see my notes that it was absurd. But what happens is the Labor Relations Board, they review all the documents and the discussions, and they decide whether my case should go back to another arbitrator, because the arbitrator, David Philip Jones, did an absolutely terrible legal decision about my case, and so I'm hoping to get a new arbitrator to look at my lack of reinstatement.
And is that your ultimate goal here? What do you want to come of this?
Yes. No, I must be reinstated. If I'm not reinstated, it means that academic freedom does not exist in universities anymore, and it is going to serve a terrible precedent for professors all across the country. And professors are already fearful and are self-censoring, and this is just going to contribute to the terrible climate that exists at universities today.
Well, let's talk about what led to this case. And I think it speaks to some of these broader issues because you'd been outspoken about government policies, institution policies. You'd been engaging in public debates on social media. What brought all of this about in the first place?
It was bubbling under the surface for quite some time. There was a number of things which sparked it, such as my views on trans activism, inviting Megan Murphy to come and enter into a debate with Julie Ray Goldstein. My views on indigenization was another area. But when I defended the journalist Wendy Mesley for saying a book title, that's when Gabrielle Weasel had decided that she had her chance, and she tried to get the president to investigate me and fire me, and instigated a mob against me from anonymous Twitter accounts. And what I did was I satirized her attempts to try to push me out of Mount Royal. That was seen as harassment by Mount Royal University, my attempts to defend myself.
Well, and despite what you've been going through at Mount Royal University, you've still been outspoken about these issues. And so it's not just a campus free speech issue at Mount Royal. You've had other public appearances on other campuses which have drawn attention. Most notably, I guess, was that just last week at the University of Lethbridge?
That's correct. That was a complete breakdown of the university. I've been to a number of university campuses. There's been quite a lot of breakdowns of the academic character of these institutions, UBC, University of British Columbia, being the most surprising. But the University of Lethbridge, I just went in under the radar because I wanted to hold a session with Tony Hall, who's a professor emeritus there, who argues that the residential schools were genocidal. So I didn't announce the event. I just stated briefly before I was going in that I would be there. Mm-hmm. And the university sent out an email to all of its faculty and students and employees saying that a controversial figure was on campus, right, and they would be saying upsetting things. And this, of course, led people to go on the hunt in search for me, and they shut down my attempts to discuss this claim with Tony Hall. And there was all sorts of assaults, theft, property damage. It was just unbelievable. And I'm currently just piecing together all the coverage now of the complete mayhem that transpired. And that's because of the president of the University of Lethbridge, who does not know how to run an academic institution.
So you were there to engage in debate and conversation.
Yes. With someone who disagrees with me.
Well, yeah,
So
exactly.
I,
Right. Which seems fitting with an academic institution.
yes. And it's not an academic institution, University of Lethbridge. The Alberta government needs to hold a public inquiry into universities and what's gone wrong. And there's many things that have happened that have made it so that professors and students cannot openly discuss ideas in a number of areas on campus.
Let's talk about the residential schools issue specifically. And as you say, I mean, you were there to have that conversation at the University of Lethbridge before things got derailed. You know, you've been accused of many things when it comes to this issue. What is your central point? What was it that you were there to advocate for or to speak to?
So that this particular session was going to be on the claim that the residential schools were genocidal, which goes to the heart of many of the sort of arguments about people should be put in jail for what's called residential school denialism.
Right.
But my more specific claim that I really want to investigate at all the universities is the claim that the remains of 215 children have been confirmed at the Kamloops Indian Residential School. And I'm currently doing a documentary on this right now with Simon Hergott, who is an incredible videographer from Kamloops. And we're doing an in-depth investigation of this situation. And it has been a massive deception that has been perpetrated by the Kamloops Indian Band and their consultants and publicists to foment this false claim so that they can divert resources from all the government entities in Canada.
Well, it's interesting because I think, as the Truth and Reconciliation Commission pointed out, I mean, there were obviously deaths that occurred at residential schools. There were cemeteries or grave sites at some of these schools. But you're right. I mean, there were some specific claims made about what was possibly found at Kamloops, and some of those claims were much more on the definitive side. So even if it's possible that children did die at some point at that residential school, what is the claim you're objecting to then?
The claim I'm objecting to is the claim about clandestine burials, that there are children who presumably had some terrible foul play that was orchestrated against them for them to be buried clandestinely. The great researcher Nina Green has done tremendous research into this area, and she has found, initially it was 49 children who died, only 2 of them at the school itself. Others died from accidents and so on. I believe the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation now has 82 names that they've identified, one of them being Nellie Enias, who was the sister of Mona Jules, who died from, I think it was pericarditis or some kind of disease. So there were children dying of disease, but they're buried in a number of different cemeteries. And the Kamloops Indian Band even has a cemetery on the reserve. There is no cemetery at the Kamloops Indian Residential School, and so any burials that would have taken place there in the apple orchard would be clandestine burials, and there's no evidence of this. It's just from ground penetrating radar.
Right.
And as well, not one parent said that their child never came home from this school, and so it's highly improbable that there are clandestine burials at this former residential school.
Now, yeah, you're right. I mean, it's ground penetrating radar that indicated there could possibly be graves there. And as you say, perhaps some went out with a little more certainty on that claim. I mean, clearly some further investigation or exhumation would give us some indication one way or the other. What's happened then with that investigation? Has it ended, or is that still ongoing? Do you know?
It is, and this is, we're waiting for documents. So Blacklock's reporter has done great research into this area, investigations. It found, I guess it was in 2024, that $12.1 million had been allocated for the excavations and associated services. This money was spent on consultants and publicists, and another $12.5 million was allocated by the Canadian government. Then, more recently, Blacklock's wanted to get a hold of what's called progress activity reports, which are those kinds of discussions that were happening on what was happening with the excavations. And the government refused to release these. They tried to seal the documents, but fortunately the privacy commissioner, or the information commissioner, I believe her name is Carolyn Maynard, said, no, that's not acceptable. Those documents must be released, and we're waiting for those documents to be released on February 20th.
Let's talk about why you believe it's important to have an open and honest conversation about all of this, because it certainly is sensitive, I think, to a lot of people. And as you say, some have, accused you of racism or residential school denialism for even talking about these issues.
Well, I am a follower of George Orwell, and George Orwell wrote very presciently on this subject in the 1930s and 40s, and that is the pursuit of an objective truth is important in a democratic society. And if you no longer have that, you have nothing to fight against authoritarian tendencies in regimes. And the fact that we cannot have the truth about Kamloops is a canary in the coal mine, and if we can't have truth about Kamloops, we're not going to be able to have truth about anything, and we are going to be heading down a very dark and dystopian path.
Well, you alluded to it earlier. There's been some talk in Ottawa that that this is something that should be formalized as a crime in the criminal code, the idea of residential school denialism. And that seems like a slippery slope in terms of what that would encompass, what constitutes denialism. It's a term that's been, I think, thrown around rather loosely at times. What do you make of that debate, and where do you think this is headed?
I'm absolutely horrified by this proposal put forward by Leah Gazan, who is an absolute embarrassment of an MP from Winnipeg. And the fact that she's not being laughed out of the House of Commons for making such an absurd and dangerous proposal is very frightening. And we really need to fight back against this with everything that we have. Speech should not be criminalized. That's how we sort out our differences in a democratic society. And if you aren't able to sort out your differences through having conversations and discussions, violence is going to be what is going to happen.
Well, I mean, if we have these laws on the books, it's going to be much harder, I think, to restore any sanity on the academic freedom side. But just going back to that for a second, as your case has drawn more attention, as there's been more public debate and conversation around academic freedom, do you feel like this is at least the pendulum starting to swing in the other direction? Are you optimistic moving forward?
Well, I try to be realistic. I've seen more movement on the Kamloops case in the last 5 or 6 months than I have in the last 5 years. There's been a number of very, very important researchers who have been working on this, writing about this since May 2021. I think I noticed this. I'm a little bit hesitant to be too optimistic, but I think people are starting to recognize that I'm not a bad actor. I'm not some kind of crank. I am a professor who is trying to pursue my obligations as a true seeker. And the fact that I have been so badly abused by my university and a whole bunch of other universities who have been fomenting basically lawless acts against me, hopefully that's coming to an end. And I want to go into more universities, but I want the presidents of those universities to step up and give the proper messaging to their students and faculty, which is those universities are academic spaces. You have to have the intellectual aspect be dominant, and we need to have these conversations. And the method that Peter Boghossian has developed, Spectrum Street epistemology, is the way that we can do that.
Yeah. Well, and I would imagine that perhaps, the reaction to some of your appearance at the University of Lethbridge was maybe trying to intimidate you or discourage you from these kinds of appearances, but you don't seem deterred. You'll be back on university campuses if invited.
I don't need to be invited. So I've got University of Alberta and Grant MacEwan University in my sights because Alberta, the universities are failing, and we need to restore our universities. And this is what exposes the terrible problems. Writing things and engaging in various legal processes, it really has a limited effect. But when you go into universities, that's when it puts pressure on these universities to change their course and to become actual academic universities again.
All right. And what next then for your reinstatement battle with Mount Royal University? Where does that go from here?
So the Alberta Labor Relations Board says it is going to take 90 days to write its decision. I'm really hoping that that decision will go back to another arbitrator, one that's much more competent than the previous one, David Philip Jones, who I don't know why that happened the way that it did. But in the meantime, I'm going to be talking about what happened on February 6th, which was all sorts of claims being made by MRU's lawyer about why I can't be reinstated. These claims that he was making are absolutely ridiculous. And once people hear about what happened on February 6th, I think they'll understand the terrible abuse that I've had to take for the last 6 years on this case.
All right. Well, we'll watch all of that very closely as that unfolds in the weeks ahead. Frances Widdowson, thank you so much for making some time for us here.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for watching and listening. Much more at nationalpost.com. My name is Rob Breakenridge. We'll talk to you next time. Take care.